Today you'll hear my guest Peymane Shafai, social media, human and women's rights activist, who will speak about the wave of acid attacks on Iranian women in recent weeks. Although this may be the first time you hear about this horrific measure by the Iranian regime, for millions of Iranians, it's a grim reminder of the first couple of years after the 1979 Iranian Revolution, when the mullahs grabbed power and began their evil plan to segregate sexes in order to tame and homebound women. Hello, Peymane. Welcome back to Radio Irava, and thank you for taking the time to talk to me.
Hello, Nargis. Thank you so much for inviting me again, and greetings to all your audience.
Peymane, we are going to discuss the wave of acid attacks on Iranian women, which has been happening for a few weeks now. Could you tell us when, for the first time, you personally heard of these acid attacks on women in Iran? And I just wanted to know if this story was picked up by the media in Iran at all, and how vast is the number of cases of the acid attacks?
When I heard the news, it was in beginning of October. And to be honest with you, I don't remember the exact date, but I just saw a mass tweets on social media, on Twitter, that it's been acid attacks, especially in Isfahan, when I heard it. And then right after, there were tweets that this was also a couple of months ago, there were 2 cases of acid attacks on women. The one that it was on the recent attacks on women in Isfahan, it was talk about the clergy of Isfahan who talks in their Friday prayers had said some really provoking things against women. And right after that, there was an acid attack that we saw a mass tweets and a lot of reaction from social media. Personally, when I heard of the acid attack, it wasn't shocking to me.
Why?
Well, because of all these crimes that Iranian regime does toward women, it wasn't shocking. It wasn't a surprise to me. I mean, I could totally feel the atrocity of this regime. This is not the first time they're doing this. But going in public in such a vast area, like, and getting the public attention, especially international attention, was something that I was really looking at. And it was, I was noticing that a lot of people were like, how could this happen in Iran? How could women not to be safe, even walk? They didn't do anything. Most of them, they were driving in their cars. The acid attackers, they splashed acid on them while the women were driving. So what have they done to cause this? But a few days before, on the Friday prayer, the clergy in Friday prayers had said, oh, this is taking too far. You should do whatever it means to stop the bad hijab and women who provoke others. So in social media, people's reaction was dismay, disgust, and everybody was astonished by the atrocity of this government.
Peymane, I've seen the footage of those demonstrations which happened in different cities in Iran. In their slogans, people were blaming the government for these acid attacks, and they even go further and say that the acid attacks are supported by the government. Is there any truth to this, or people are just lashing out?
Well, this is not the first time that Iranian women are seeing this kind of violence. I mean, the only thing is that since we didn't have social media and we didn't have any kind of sending the news out, that's why we haven't heard of it so widely. Thanks to the new technology and people talking over internet and sending their news out, now we are recently been able to show all these violence towards Iranians, especially towards women. And this has been happening since past 35 years. And I have a lot of encounters as a child. When I was in Iran, I have seen these kind of violence with my own eyes. So it's not something new. And that's why there's so much truth into that. Right now they have their police, and they call it Niruy Intizami. They have their Basij forces, they have their ministry forces, and now they have these new quote-unquote libas shakhsi in Persian, and they call it the outsiders, or people who just carry out these attacks that are unknown people. But they're supported by government for sure. The reason I say that so bluntly, that they are supported by government, there has never been an action against them. When the uprising of 2008 happened, all these people who were against demonstrations, they would come out, and the Basiji forces and the police forces right behind them, and they would attack men and women with help of police and Basij forces.
You're talking about the plainclothes forces, right?
Yes, exactly.
So you mentioned, Peymane, that you witnessed some atrocities when you were a child in the beginning of the 1979 revolution. Can you elaborate on that a little bit for us, please?
Yes, when you look at the history of Iran's revolution, right after the revolution, when revolution was stolen by this tyrannic regime and clerics, right away, the very first attack they had was on women. They were among the very first group in Iran that were suppressed. There's so much hatred towards women by this clergy. They demonize women as if all the bad stuff in the society, all these negatives are coming from Iranian women because they're dressing provocatively, or they're not acting as their quotas. It's a very misogynist government.
Is it because of the religious views, Peymane, or is it because of the political agenda?
It's a mixture of both, but it's mostly political agenda, because Iranian women are very strong. They are the biggest group that stood up against government from the beginning. When Khomeini started enforcing the hijab, or enforced cover on women, the very first protest was conducted by women. You asked me about my own encounter. Right after a few, I think it was a year or so, or a couple of years after this enforced hijab, that everybody at school, they had to wear a certain cover and veil and all that. And we were forced to only wear black and white at that time. I remember two of my friends who were wearing jeans, and they had like yellow stocking, and it was just a few inches that it would show. They arrested them. This is in Karaj. I remember very vividly. In middle of street, these two poor girls, they were age 14. They were lashing them in public, so they make a point that you shouldn't walk around like that. And all they did, they had their covers, they had their veil, they had everything. Just a couple of inches of yellow was showing. And now Iranian women became so, they protest this enforced hijab to the point that they wear, short kind of like dress with pants. When we say this, it's like, in Western, we live in Western countries and it doesn't matter for us, but in Iran, it's such a protest to the government that they're wearing like this, and they're trying to say a big no to the law enforcement Iranian regime, that this is not what they accept. So it's just protesting against government, and that's what government is most afraid of. When you look at the people uprising in 2008 in Iran, women were amongst the first group who came out, and you saw Neda, Taraneh Mousavi, Neda Agha Sultan. They were amongst people, the women, the pioneers who came out and said, no to the regime, and it still continues. That's why the regime is so afraid of. So it's a mixture of, to answer your question, it's a mixture of political enforcing, so to speak, religious, which is not Islamic at all, to enforce a woman to wear hijab, and the political agenda. On the surface, you think it's Islam, but when you look at it, it's all political agenda, because the true moderate Islam does not accept this.
Peymane, you've talked about how your classmates were lashed because an inch of yellow stocking was showing off their feet. I believe that was what you meant.
Right.
I've heard recently that the formation of organized groups in different cities in Iran, and these are public and they are imposing an old measure or act called to promote virtue and prevent vice, or as we say in Farsi, Amr be Ma'ruf wa Nahy az Munkar. Can you tell our non-Iranian audience what exactly these groups and people do?
Well, this is maybe a very formal construction of this groups that you're talking about. It's a formal announcement, but this has been going on for past 35 years. So to our non-Iranian audience, when the revolution happened, from the very beginning that the hijab or forced cover was enforced on people, the Revolutionary Guards, that they would carry, they had special cars like a four-wheel drive car, which at that time there were hardly any four-wheel drive in Iran. I'm talking about 1979, 1980s. At that time, they had these Nissan patrols, and there were four people sitting in a car, two women, two men, going out, and they would go to, especially women, and have them cover their hair properly, make sure they're not putting any makeup. First, they would start with just saying to them, and if you just, didn't follow them, they would take you, imprison you, lash you. Some parents, they were worried of their kids if they were late, and they were thinking, oh, perhaps they called it Comité or Revolutionary Guard place, have taken our kids. So it was a very, very horrific environment for teenagers, young girls, and young women. Not only that, they would come up to young couples and ask what their relationship is about. And that's where it started. And then gradually it became law, which has been enforcing all throughout these 35 years.
So in the last 35 years, what has been the reaction of people to this kind of atrocities, this kind of inhumane measure against them? What have they done?
Well, they showed their protest as as silly as you think, that, a girl would put up too much makeup on just to make a point. It starts from, like, why do you tell these kids what color to wear? They're even forcing colors to people. At school, you're allowed to wear only dark colors. And then when they go out, despite that, they just go and they make all these fun colors. They wear fun colors. They try to show their reaction of the mischievous act of government towards women. And they try to protest that. So it starts from those silly, little childish reaction to very serious ones, as of, uprising, women being front row, demanding when there was the acid attack, women on the street, they were screaming for, we want security, we want safety, and we want freedom. That was their very first demands. That's what the government is afraid of. Let me just add one more thing that I think it's very important for your audience to know, that when there's one of the government agents used to work at Revolutionary Guard, and now he's in U.S., Akbar Ganji.
Yes.
He confessed that when he was a Revolutionary Guard, he would put pushpins on women's forehead. So when you talk about ISS and Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, for Iranian women, this is not a new term. They've been dealing with it for past 35 years.
What was the reaction of the Iranian regime, and especially Hassan Rouhani, the Iranian regime's president?
Well, usually when something happens, they're the first one who react. But for this case, they, like if something happens in Iran, like a video of a bunch of kids playing happy song or making, I'm sure you remember the happy song that the video clip that Iranian teenagers made. Yes. Within few hours, they arrested them, they lashed them, they put them in prison, they imprisoned them. But when something to this extent happens, I think for maybe a few days they didn't even say anything. And when they came out, they said, As usual, they blamed it on West and, foreign forces or whatever
Spy
they call
agencies.
it. The spies. I don't know why these spies would put acid on Iranian women. They can do so many other things, but it's like a very desperate cry that, oh, we don't know anything. And they didn't even condemn. The thing is, they didn't condemn in the beginning. That's very important. Like Hassan Rouhani, he didn't use the word, we simply condemn these acid attackers. And one more thing, whenever something happens in Iran or there's an uprising, you have all these thugs that they hold demonstration, they support, they go out, the Basijis, they go out and they start breaking windows to protest West and death to Israel, death to America. We didn't see any of these Basijis or Revolutionary Guard to go out in support of Iranian women, but we saw clips of arresting the demonstrators. Why would you arrest a person on the street protesting against this vicious attack on women? The only reason is that you had something to do with it. In the beginning, people in Isfahan, in an accident, they captured a few men with the acid in their hands, and they turned them into authorities, to the police. And a few days later, AJ comes and says, oh, there was no arrests. Wow. What happened to these men? These facts show clearly that Iranian regime, like usual, whenever something happens, any kind of terrorist attack, any kind of vicious attack, inside or outside Iran, they have something to do with it.
Additional pressure on Iranian women, it's not something new, and I think every Iranian woman has experienced this. But as you're talking about the intensify of suppression against women, this question comes to mind, that what is happening in Iran? Why this level of suppression is getting even higher? What is happening in Iran?
Iran is like a ticking bomb. Iranian people are just fed up with all this suppression, and they're just like little fireworks, and they're just about to explode. And Iranian regime knows that. And all these atrocities, acid attacks, execution of Reyhan Jabari in a time that Iranian regime is in a very bad position internationally, it comes from weakness. It comes from its weakness toward people. And they're afraid of another uprising. And this time, they know they cannot stop it. And they have said it so many times. The acid attack on women, it's very much organized. The Friday prayer right after these acid attacks in Isfahan, and then we hear cases in Tehran. This is really something that it's been organized or planned. It's not something that just happened out of the blue. When you look at the facts, what Ahmad Jannati had said, he said in Friday prayers, Iranians should not stand for bad hijab. They should fight it. Nobody has the right, he says, nobody has the right to limit law enforcement to fight bad hijabs.
Peymane, I understand what hijab is, and I understand what not hijab is. But this term, bad hijab, what does it exactly mean?
This is a mullah's made term. I'm sorry that I'm using it so much because it's been used on social media. A lot of people know what it is. That's why I use it. But just to make it clear to others, hijab means women are supposed to cover their hair under their Islamic code. And the way Iranian, I guess, law works is that they force women to wear long dress, do not show any skin, and do not show any hair. They can only show their face. And if their hair is out, if their head is uncovered, law enforcement have the right to go to them and ask them to correct their covers. The term of hijab literally means cover, to cover themselves. And they have a code, like when you go to public place, when you go to governmental place, they have a dress code for women that they have to follow.
Those people who stop you on the street, are those people armed with any weapons?
Most of them, if they're of the Revolutionary Guard, they are armed. We have seen a lot of footage of the Revolutionary Guard attacking women on the street, forcing them to get in the car, taking them to stations where they would get, tortured, further punishments for bad cover or bad hijab. They made so many layers of suppressing people. They created all these levels. You have law enforcement, you have Revolutionary Guard, and then you have plainclothes that are the ones that they don't have any, or Basijis. They don't have, Basijis are another layer, and then you have the Lebas Shakhsi or plainclothes forces. They don't have any kind of badge. They don't have any kind of official.
So you can't tell the difference when you walk on the street?
No, you cannot tell the difference. But Basijis, they have cards, and all of these people are armed.
Peymane, as you know, Ahmad Shahid, United Nations Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in Iran, recently in his latest report to UN said that human rights is violated by both the law and the regime's officials. My question is, will this blunt remarks, which I think it's been done for the first time, will have any implication for the Iranian regime, and if they would have any effect of 5+1 nuclear talks with the Iranian regime?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, this is the first time that such a huge condemnation has been placed, especially these few days in Geneva. Dr. Shahid has presented his case, and a lot of countries had come up forward and condemned, a lot of media attention to this. Of course, it has its consequences for the regime. At the time that they're trying to portray Rouhani as a moderate and, Iran is getting better, now we see acid attacks. And this is when you look at the execution of Reyhan Jabbari, that seems like a huge mistake by Iranian regime, but they have no choice. They have to do this to make this torturous environment for Iranian people. So despite all the international pressure, they are discrediting themselves to the international community. And this is really bad for the regime. It's like a chess game. They're checkmate. They are stuck, and the only choice is to suppress people. And despite the international pressure on them, they do that. It's like a lose-lose situation for the Iranian regime. So yes, it will affect for sure on nuclear talks. I think yesterday or the day before, Ed Royce, who is the representative in Congress, he had issued a statement that when we talk with Iranian regime, we have to put the factors of HR violation, human rights violation on the table. It cannot be separated from nuclear talks. And Congress is trying to make Obama administration to consider human rights violation in Iran while negotiating the nuclear talks.
I hope it gets somewhere. Peymane, a few days ago I was talking to a friend of mine, and we were talking, and he asked me, what do you think? Is ISIS more inhumane or the Iranian regime and what they're doing in Iran? Of course, I said both are inhuman, but I'd like to present this question to you, and also this important question that can we even compare the two?
Well, it's funny that ISIS is now getting so much attention when Iran has been under ISIS for such a long time. The only reason for that is, I think, because of the social media. ISIS does a case of beheading, which is horrific and horrible, and no question about the criminal acts of ISIS. And one beheading gets so much media attention because they put it on YouTube. But Iranian regime doesn't put its crime on YouTube. People of Iran up to a few years ago did not have the ability to put the atrocities of the regime in picture. Now that social media, mobile, and internet is popular in Iran, even under the filter of regime, even under all these, enforcement, that one of the other polices that they have is internet police. Even under all those suppression, Iranians have managed to get the pictures out. And yes, they're both horrible, but in my view, Iranian regime is the cause of ISIS. they have the ones who nourished the act of ISIS. They were the very first one who used knives, beheading. We have a lot of cases of beheading by Iranian government officials that they have done it to, the Farrokhzad, the singer.
Yes.
They've done
In
it
Germany, yeah.
Germany. They've done it to Mr. Bruman, Shapur Bakhtiar, Dr. Kazem Rajavi. They've done this. This is not new. The attacks by knives and bullets and everything has been going on for many years. But as I said, social media, internet, and the way that people put it in picture has been different. And actually, I like ISIL better than Iranian regime because they're very forefront. They show, okay, this is our really true face. But Iranian regime, they try to be so sneaky. They put on Rouhani as a moderate, and then in their action,
we have 1,000 executions.
We have 1,000 execution, and especially the one that's really heartbreaking. And Dr. Shahid brought both of these cases into his report very clearly. One is execution of Ghulam Reza Khosravi, who was executed for donating money to an opposition TV, which had no connection with the opposition as of, doing any kind of work for them, just because he helped financially a very small amount of money to Iranian opposition TV. And then you have a woman who tried to protect herself against rape. And
you're talking about Rayhan Jabari, right?
Exactly. Mr. Shahid and all of the Amnesty International documents shows that she wasn't under a fair trial. There were so many factors that are vague in her case, and Iranian government did not pay attention to that. This is ISIS of Iran.
Peymane, I've been following Iranian resistance activities since the acid attack occurred in Iran, and I've noticed that they have exposed this news about the acid attacks very widely. What is the analysis of the resistance about this misogynist measure? And also, what is the solution, do you think, to the Iranian regime's problem, and how these atrocities will end?
Iranian resistance called on all international organization and community in defense of human rights and women's rights, and condemn this blind state terrorism and press the clerical regime to end this barbaric act against women. Mrs. Mariam Rajavi has called on international community and international governments to do this. But the solution, when you ask, well, let's back up. Let's look at Iranian regime's reaction to all this. In fact, they stated that the People's Mujahideen are the ones who publicized this, and it shouldn't have been this big. So they blame Mujahideen for publicizing it, and that's, I think, it's a credit to PMOI movement and NCRI organization that we should credit them, that they are the first ones to show the atrocities of this government. And as an Iranian, I'm very thankful that we have this kind of resistance. When you ask for a solution to end this violence in Iran, the only thing is that when you look at all this 35 years of past history of this regime, you've seen hardliners, you've seen moderates, you've seen lowliners, whatever you call them. The clerical regime must go. And that's the only solution, and that's what Iranian resistance is saying. To solve this violence in Iran, we need a regime change, a democratic movement to change this regime and bring prosperity, safety, and protection of human rights in Iran. You look at the ugliness of regime, and you look at the beautiful resistance that it gives you, the 10-point plan that Mariam Rajavi is talking about. You put it two and two together. Any human being look at the two, says, yes, we do need a regime change in Iran, and we cannot save Iran and, I believe, Middle East without a regime change in Iran.
We talked about the victims of these acid attacks who are women in Iran. If you were to say a word or send a message to these victims, what would you tell them?
It's very hard when you think of what happened to them. It's not like stabbing them. It's not like lashing them. If I was a victim myself, I I would have said, why didn't they just kill me? Why did they take away my face? And such a violent act. It's really horrible. I mean, it makes my heart break to look at even the clips. You know, I saw a YouTube clip and I lost my sleep ever since then, looking the image of that young, beautiful woman who was, you know, attacked by acid, and her face was completely gone. You could see her bones. And it was really scary. And I'm like, oh my God, this could be myself. This could be my child. It's very hard to give them a message. What can I tell them to make them feel any different? Nothing. Nothing. I mean, I'm speechless. I just can cry. That's the only thing I can do, because I see my shortcoming of not doing anything about this government, that, you know, I feel so hopeless and upset at myself that I should have done more. But my message to them is, hang in there. There's hope. We won't allow this again.
Thank you, Peymane, for your insight and valuable time. I just hope that countries such as Canada, who is advocating for freedom of Iranian people, stand up once again and step up their games and offer assistance to these victims of acid attacks, such as treatment in their countries or in Canada in any way they can. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much, and such a nice gesture from you. And it's a great idea that all international community offer medical help to these victims, and not just condemning the regime in words, but they do it in action too. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate that.
We stand in the wind, in the cold, through the rain. We walk through the storm as it rages away. In the dark of the night, our faith lights the way, while in our hearts all is one. We say we're standing till the end. Till the end. We banish the dark with the gleam of our eyes, with the beacon of hope. Our flame never dies. We challenge the odds with the sounds of our cries, and we waken the world with our sacrifice. Till the